At 6:48 on a rainy Tuesday morning, I was standing beside my 7-year-old son when an HOA employee took our picture from a golf cart. The rain was light enough that nobody had opened an umbrella yet. It left a shine on the private loop road and collected along the faded blue lines beside our neighborhood mail pavilion. Mateo stood close to me with his backpack under his jacket. 3 other parents were nearby. A yellow school bus was still 8 minutes away, according to the district app. The employee slowed down, lifted her phone, and pointed it toward us. I assumed she was photographing the gray SUV parked too close to the curb. That vehicle had been a problem before. It narrowed the turn for the bus and made it harder for residents to pull into the mailbox spaces. I even stepped aside so she would have a clear view of its license plate. By lunch, a violation notice was waiting in my resident portal. The subject line said, "Adult loitering at designated school bus area." The photograph showed me Mateo, the other parents, and the back corner of the SUV. It did not show the full walkway to the mailboxes. It did not show that the bus arrived at 6:56, or that every adult had left by 6:58. It showed one moment at 6:48, and treated that moment as a violation. The notice said adults were no longer permitted to congregate at the bus stop, whether standing or waiting in parked vehicles. Children could continue using the area as usual. A second occurrence could result in a fine. Mateo was in 2nd grade. Under the school district's release procedure, his driver was supposed to see an approved adult before letting him off the bus in the afternoon. I had signed that form at the start of the school year. My name and my husband's name were on the account. If neither of us was visible, the driver could keep Mateo on the bus and return him to school after the route. So the HOA had given me 2 instructions that did not fit together. Stay away from the stop, but be present when my son arrived. I did not send the response I wanted to send. I work as a route planner for a regional grocery company. Half my day is spent sorting out instructions that looked reasonable in somebody's office, but do not work when a driver reaches a loading dock. You learn not to start with blame. You start with the instruction number, the time it took effect, and the person who approved it. I wrote a short email. Please identify the rule number, the date it was adopted, and the location where an approved adult should wait for a child subject to the district release procedure. I kept the wording narrow because the morning routine itself was narrow. On a normal day, Mateo and I left our townhouse at 6:43. He checked the bus icon on my phone while I locked the door. We walked past 2 garage rows, crossed the loop at the speed table, and reached the blue box with 5 or 6 minutes to spare. I did not bring coffee. Mateo did not run around the mailboxes. Most mornings he stood with 2 friends, comparing whatever had happened in a game the night before. At 6:56, the bus arrived. By 7 o'clock I was back at my kitchen table, with a headset on, reviewing the first route exceptions from work. The afternoon was similar. The bus app gave me enough warning to close my laptop, walk out, and return within 15 minutes. That routine was one reason we had bought in Briar Glen. My husband worked rotating hospital shifts, and I could cover school release without driving across town or leaving Mateo with a neighbor. The Directive made a very small part of the day sound like an ongoing occupation. It also ignored the reason adults were there. We were not using the pavilion because it was a pleasant place to spend a rainy morning. We were matching the bus schedule. Management answered the next morning. This is a board directive, intended to protect access and reduce crowding. There was no rule number, no adoption date, no answer about where I should stand. 2 days later, another notice appeared in the portal. To understand why parents waited beside the mail pavilion, you have to understand Briar Glen. Our neighborhood had 184 townhouses built around a one-way loop. The loop was private. The HOA maintained it, paid for resurfacing, and controlled the parking spaces along it. The homes were close together, with short driveways and garages that opened almost directly onto the road. The mail pavilion sat near the widest curve. It was a simple brick structure with a shallow roof, 2 walls of metal boxes, and 3 parking spaces. Beside it was a curb long enough for a school bus to stop without blocking a garage. Faded blue paint marked a rectangle between the pavilion and the curb. Nobody I knew could explain who painted that rectangle. We treated it as the bus area because that was how it had always been used. Outside the neighborhood entrance, the county road was a different place. It had 2 narrow lanes, a drainage ditch instead of a sidewalk, and a blind curve west of our gate. Cars came through faster than they should, especially in the morning. If the school bus stopped outside Briar Glen, children would have to gather on a strip of grass between the pavement and the ditch. I had moved into the neighborhood 5 years earlier, after the bus was already using the private loop. Older residents told me the district had once kept the stop on the county road. Parents spent months asking for it to be moved inside. Eventually, the bus began entering through the east gate, circling the mail pavilion, and exiting through the west gate. Even residents without children benefited. The county road no longer had a line of cars pulled onto wet grass during pickup. Briar Glen had taken a messy public road stop and moved it onto property the community could actually manage. That history made the new directive stranger. The HOA was treating parents as if they had wandered into a location chosen for some unrelated purpose. In reality, adult supervision and student pickup had helped shape how the space was used. That arrangement mattered. It kept children off the shoulder. It also meant the bus could collect almost every elementary student at one place. But the complaints about the pavilion were not invented. Some mornings, a parent left an engine running beside the curb. One man brought a folding chair and set it close to the mailbox walkway. People talked while waiting, and when 8 or 10 adults were there, they spread out. A paper coffee cup had been left on top of a parcel locker more than once. I had noticed those things without treating them as a serious problem. That changed when I spoke to Nora Price. Nora lived in the first row of townhouses. She was 72 and had started using a cane after hip surgery. The afternoon after my second notice, I saw her walking back from the pavilion with a bundle of mail tucked under one arm. "Were you one of the people who complained about the bus stop?" I asked. She stopped and looked at me for a second. "I complained about getting to my mailbox," she said. "That is not the same thing." She told me there had been mornings when she waited in her car because the space between the parents and the brick column was too narrow for her to pass comfortably. Once, somebody had leaned a bicycle against the parcel lockers. Another morning, the gray SUV had taken up part of the striped access area. "I asked them to keep a path open," she said. "I did not ask them to leave children alone. That was fair. More than fair, actually. I had treated the mailbox complaint as background noise because it complicated my side of the argument. Nora had to use that walkway every day. Parents used it for 12 minutes. I showed her the photograph in my violation notice. She tapped the right edge of the image. "That is where the walkway should be." They cropped it out. Then she pointed to the blue paint under our feet. "That box was put there when they moved the bus inside," she said. "At least I think it was. It has been painted over so many times that nobody remembers." I went home and opened a satellite image of the pavilion. Using the measurement tool, I drew a waiting box large enough for the usual group and left a 4-foot path from the parking spaces to the mailboxes. I marked a no-standing strip along the bus turn. Then I listed the actual windows when the area was busy, 6:40 to 6:58 in the morning, and roughly 3:05 to 3:20 in the afternoon. I printed the drawing and took it to Nora. She walked the proposed path with her cane, counting her steps. "This would work," she said, "if people stay in the box." 2 other parents agreed. We added simple conditions: no folding chairs, no idling beside the pavilion, no coffee cups left behind. Parents would remind each other to stay inside the marked area, and vehicles would use the regular parking spaces. It was not a grand legal strategy. It was tape, paint, and 15 minutes of basic courtesy. I sent the plan to management with photographs and Nora's written support. Marjorie Vale, the HOA president, answered that evening. "The issue is adult presence, not the shape of the waiting area, she wrote. Her email said the board had received repeated complaints that children felt crowded and residents felt watched while collecting mail. Adults could supervise from home or from a place outside the pavilion area. She did not say where that place was. Many townhouses, including mine, had no view of the stop, and the directive already said waiting in a parked car near the stop was prohibited. I replied that I was willing to follow a clear path, a time window, and parking restrictions. I asked again where the board expected an approved adult to stand. Marjorie closed the discussion. Any objection may be raised at a compliance hearing after a fine is assessed. The following Monday, management placed a temporary sign in the faded blue rectangle. Student waiting only. That afternoon, I tried to obey it as closely as I could without disappearing. I stood about 30 feet away, near the first row of visitor spaces. I was outside the blue area and away from the pavilion. When the bus arrived, the driver opened the door, looked toward the waiting children, then looked around for me. Mateo came down the steps to the last one and stopped. The driver leaned toward the open door. "I need to see your adult." Mateo pointed across the parking area. I raised my hand. The driver recognized me and let him off. The delay was less than a minute, but Mateo was embarrassed. He came over and asked why I had been hiding. I was not hiding, I told him. I was trying to stand where everybody says I am allowed to stand. Even as I said it, I could hear how ridiculous it sounded. The next morning, I called the district transportation office. I did not ask them to overrule the HOA. I asked for the current release procedure and an explanation of what adult present meant for a second-grade student. After 2 transfers, I reached Denise Ward, a transportation safety specialist. She looked up Mateo's route and confirmed the instruction. For students in his release group, the driver needed to see an approved adult at the stop. An adult watching through a window did not count if the driver could not identify that person. A parent sitting in a car might count if the driver could clearly see and recognize them, but a car hidden behind the pavilion would not. "We decide how a child is released," Denise said. "We do not decide who your HOA allows on common property." That distinction mattered. The district could not erase an HOA rule. The HOA could not change the district's release procedure. I was stuck between them. Denise asked for our stop number. When she pulled up the route map, she paused. "This bus enters a private loop," she said. "Yes. Do you know whether the association signed an access agreement?" I did not. She explained that districts often require written permission before buses regularly enter privately maintained roads. The file might include a route sketch, turning clearance, or conditions for the stop. Her electronic record only showed that the internal stop had been approved years earlier. "I can send you the release matrix," she said. "For the access file, I will have to request archived material." That afternoon, the first actual fine appeared in my portal. The amount was modest by itself. The problem was the sentence below it. Each documented day could be treated as a separate occurrence. On Wednesday, management photographed me again. On Thursday, a second fine appeared. By Friday, I could see the shape of the pressure. The board did not need to impose one enormous penalty. It could create a row of small ones, each tied to the simple fact that I had to be visible when Mateo came home. I sent a certified letter to the HOA's management office. I asked for the adopted rule, the board minutes approving it, the map of the restricted area, and the method by which a parent could comply with both the directive and the district release procedure. I also asked the board to state whether the association accepted responsibility if a child was not released because the parent remained away from the stop. The answer came from management, not from Marjorie. The HOA did not accept responsibility for student transportation or release. Parents remained responsible for their children and should arrange remote supervision consistent with community standards. Remote supervision was not a location. Community standards was not a rule number. So I opened the governing documents. I am not a lawyer, and I did not suddenly become one because I was angry. I read the section that applied to the problem in front of me. The board had authority to adopt reasonable rules for common areas. It also had a procedure for doing that. The proposed rule had to appear on a meeting agenda. The board had to vote, and management had to send notice before enforcement began. I searched every set of minutes posted in the resident portal for the previous year. The board had discussed mailbox access twice. It had approved a new towing vendor and replacement lighting. It had not voted on an adult ban. The only document calling the ban a rule was the same management email sent after my first photograph. I requested a compliance hearing. Under the HOA's own enforcement policy, contested fines stopped accumulating while a timely hearing was pending. That did not erase the first two, but it prevented the amount from growing every day while the board decided when to meet. For the first time since the notice arrived, I had a little room to work. The hearing was not scheduled immediately. Management first offered a date during my workday with 4 days' notice. I asked for the evening session listed in the enforcement policy. The next available slot was almost 2 weeks away. The pause also gave the board time to correct the process quietly. They could have placed a proposed rule on the next agenda and considered the measured waiting area. Instead, management prepared to defend the existing directive. Then management sent the hearing packet. It contained 3 photographs under the heading, "Continuing all morning occupation." At first glance, the images made the parents look as if they had been at the pavilion for a long time. There was a photograph with 6 adults, another with 8, and one with 5 adults and 2 parked cars. Marjorie's written summary said residents were being denied normal access throughout the morning. The photographs had dates and times in the lower corner. Monday, 6:47. Wednesday, 6:51. Friday, 6:45. They were 3 moments on 3 different days. At work, I planned delivery routes for 26 stores. A late truck can look like a driver problem until you compare the appointment time, the gate log, the unloading start, and the traffic exception. I use a deviation sheet because memory gets very confident after the fact. I made one for the bus stop. The district app stored the predicted arrival and actual arrival each day. My doorbell camera showed when I left home and when I returned. Other parents sent screenshots of their alerts. I listed 7 school days in a table. The shortest morning window was 9 minutes. The longest was 16 because the bus was delayed. The average was just under 12. I also recorded the problems instead of hiding them. On Tuesday, the gray SUV stopped in the wrong place for 6 minutes. On Thursday, a bicycle narrowed the mailbox path. 1 paper cup was left on a parcel locker Friday. Those were real events. They needed a parking reminder, a clear walkway, and a trash can. They did not prove adults occupied the pavilion all morning. Nora came over while I was arranging the pages. I showed her the hearing packet. Her name appeared in Marjorie's summary as one of the residents whose complaints supported removing adults. I never said that, Nora told me. She had emailed management twice. She still had both messages. One asked that the accessible striping remain clear. The other asked whether parent vehicles could use the regular spaces instead of the curb. Neither asked for an adult ban. Nora forwarded them to me and wrote a new statement. I support a marked waiting area that preserves continuous mailbox access. I do not support removing supervising adults. One of the fathers suggested posting the hearing photographs and Marjorie's email in the neighborhood group. He wanted everyone to know the board had stretched 3 short windows into all morning. I asked him not to. Public embarrassment might have felt satisfying for an evening. It also would have given the hearing a new subject. Who insulted whom online? I wanted the board to answer the dates, the times, and the missing rule. I sent my 7-day table, Nora's statement, and the revised site sketch to management. 2 days later, the meeting agenda changed. The phrase, "all morning occupation," disappeared. The hearing remained scheduled. I still did not know why the blue rectangle had been painted beside the pavilion. When I asked the property manager for the work order, she said the current vendor had no record of painting it. The management company had taken over only 3 years earlier. Older paper records were incomplete. You might ask a former board member, she said. Nora knew one. Arthur Klein had served as board secretary when the school bus began using the private loop. He lived 3 streets over and kept more paper than anyone I had ever met. When Nora called him, he remembered the route fight, but not the exact terms. There was a packet, he said. The district made us submit a drawing. I may still have the transition box. The transition box was under the stairs in Arthur's house. It was a plastic storage bin full of old agendas, reserve studies, landscaping bids, and meeting binders. Arthur explained that the association's previous management company had returned several boxes when it closed its local office. The new board collected most of them. This one stayed behind because the label said school and pedestrian items, and nobody thought it mattered. We did not dig through it like people searching for buried treasure. Arthur cleared his dining table. I photographed the label on the bin and the tabs inside each binder before we moved anything. Then we made a list. The route file was near the bottom. 8 years earlier, Briar Glen children had used a stop outside the east gate. The board minutes described complaints about the drainage ditch, morning traffic, and limited sight distance at the curve. Parents petitioned the district to bring the bus inside the community. The request took 4 months. The district measured the turning radius. The HOA agreed to keep the loop clear during route windows. The board approved an access license allowing district buses to enter the private road for student pickup and release. Behind that license was a site plan. It showed the mail pavilion, the curb, the bus path, and a rectangle in blue pencil. An arrow pointed to it. Supervised receiving area. I read the label twice. Several pages behind it explained the drawing. The district had rejected the HOA's first layout because parked vehicles could block the driver's view. The revised version moved the adult area closer to the door side of the bus and created the clear strip to the mailboxes. The old board had not stumbled into the blue rectangle. It had changed the plan after a safety review. There was also a maintenance note. The HOA was supposed to refresh the markings when it resurfaced the loop. The blue paint in the current pavement was faded because the last seal coating project had covered part of it, not because the supervised area had been formally abandoned. Arthur found invoices for the first striping job and a letter announcing the new stop to residents. The letter asked parents to remain inside the marked area and keep the mailbox path open. It could almost have been the compromise I had sent Marjorie, except it was 8 years old and carried the association's letterhead. I felt a quick rush of vindication. Then I read the complaint notes attached to the following year's review. Parents had drifted outside the box even then. One vehicle had blocked the turn. The old system had required reminders. That detail kept the file honest. The plan had never removed the need for management. It showed what management was supposed to manage. The current faded box was not a random piece of paint. It marked the place the HOA had offered when it asked the district to move the stop off the county road. The agreement did not say parents could take over the pavilion. It did not guarantee folding chairs, idling cars, or unlimited gatherings. The HOA had promised to maintain a clear pedestrian route and a no parking zone around the bus turn. It had also agreed not to withdraw the supervised receiving area without notifying the district for a route review. The district kept the right to change or suspend the internal stop if the agreed safety layout was removed or obstructed. That was the important part, and it was also where I had to be careful. The agreement did not make me automatically right about every detail. Marjorie could still argue for time limits and access rules. In fact, the old site plan supported part of her complaint. The walkway was supposed to remain clear. What it did not support was pretending adult presence had never been part of the arrangement. Arthur found the board minutes approving the license. The vote had been unanimous. Residents had applauded when the district confirmed the route move. People forget what they had to do to get something, Arthur said. After a few years, it just looks permanent. He scanned the packet. I sent a copy to management and asked that the original be added to the association archive. I also sent it to Denise Ward at the district. Denise confirmed the file number matched the archived route entry. She would not interpret the HOA's governing documents, and she would not comment on my fines. She could evaluate whether the present site still met the district's conditions. She scheduled a route safety walk for the following Tuesday at 6:35 in the morning. Marjorie responded the same day. She wrote that an old site plan did not prevent the board from updating common area rules. She was correct about that. Then she said management planned to cover the faded blue lines because they no longer reflected current policy. The property manager apparently saw the problem before I had to answer. An hour later, she sent a second message, saying no physical change would be made while the district review was pending. That small delay mattered. It kept the site as it was, until somebody could inspect it. The Tuesday review happened in steady rain. Denise arrived before sunrise wearing a reflective jacket and carrying a clipboard, a measuring wheel, and the old plan in a clear plastic sleeve. Arthur came because he had the original packet. Nora came with her cane. Marjorie and one other board member stood under the pavilion roof. Denise started by watching the area without changing anything. Parents arrived the way they normally did. Some stood in the faded box. Others drifted toward the mailboxes. One person set a backpack on the parcel shelf. The gray SUV pulled close to the curb again. Nora walked from the parking space to her mailbox. She made it through, but she had to turn sideways around two adults. "That is the complaint," Marjorie said. "It is," I said. There was no point denying what everyone could see. Then I asked the parents to try the proposed layout. We used blue painter's tape to mark the waiting box and white tape to mark a 4-foot path. The father with the SUV moved it into a regular space. Backpacks stayed inside the box. Nobody stood beside the parcel lockers. Nora walked the route again. This time she did not slow down. Denise measured the path in 2 places. She checked the distance from the box to the curb and watched the bus make its turn. When it stopped, the driver could see the adults without looking through parked cars. Mateo stepped onto the bus. I waved to the driver. The entire stop took less than 2 minutes. Denise wrote notes but did not announce a verdict. After the bus left, she asked us to walk with her to the old county road location. The rain made the ditch look deeper than it did on a dry day. There was no paved shoulder. A narrow strip of wet grass ran between the road and the drop into the drainage channel. We stood there at the same time children would have been gathering. A delivery truck came around the curve. It stayed in its lane. Nothing dramatic happened. It did not need to. The spray from its tires hit the edge of the grass, and the driver could not have seen our group until the truck cleared the bend. Denise explained the district's position in plain terms. The internal stop had been approved because the HOA granted access and provided a workable receiving area. The district could keep using it if the bus path, visibility, and student release conditions remained workable. If the HOA formally removed the supervised area or prohibited the adults required for release, transportation staff would have to review the stop again. That did not mean the bus would automatically move back to the exact patch of grass where we were standing. It meant the current stop could no longer be assumed. "Would the replacement be as convenient?" one parent asked. "I cannot promise there would be a replacement inside this community," Denise said. Nora looked at Marjorie. "I asked for a path to my mailbox," she said. "I did not ask you to send these children out here." Marjorie kept her voice calm. She said the board had an obligation to manage common property and could not allow one group to claim it every morning and afternoon. I agreed with the first half. "Then manage the 12 minutes, I said. "Do not pretend the only options are a blocked walkway or no adults." The other board member asked why the access license had not been included in the board packet when the directive was discussed. Marjorie said management had not located it. That was believable. The file had been under Arthur's stairs and the current manager had never seen it. But once the file existed, the board could not make its decision as if it did not. Residents began requesting a formal meeting. Some were parents. Others had no school-age children, but did not want the bus route put at risk. A few still wanted the pavilion cleared completely. The neighborhood did not switch sides in one afternoon. That helped. in a strange way. The issue stopped being a contest between good parents and bad board members. It became a choice about how a shared space should work. Management opened a written comment period before the meeting. The responses were less dramatic than the neighborhood group had made them sound. One resident supported the adult ban because early conversation carried into her bedroom. Another wanted the bus moved to the clubhouse, not realizing the bus could not make the turn there without backing. 3 residents asked for a trash can. 6 wanted vehicle enforcement but had no objection to standing parents. Several had never seen the directive until the route review was announced. I mapped the comments by problem, the same way I sorted store complaints at work: noise, parking, walkway, trash, child release. Route location. The adult ban was the only proposed solution that tried to answer every category at once. It did not answer any of them precisely. A parent could leave while a badly parked vehicle still blocked the curb. A child could drop a wrapper. A quiet adult inside the blue box did not prevent mail access. Marjorie submitted her own statement. She wrote that she had received verbal complaints for months and believed quick action was necessary before the school year became busier. I believed her. I also noticed that quick action had skipped the step where separate complaints were turned into separate rules. That was the tone I wanted to carry into the meeting. The board had not invented every problem. It had bundled them together and chosen a solution too broad to survive contact with the actual route. 2 days before the meeting, the HOA's attorney sent a short memo to the board. Management included it in the public packet. The memo did not say adults had an unlimited right to the pavilion. It said the association should not defend the existing fines unless it could identify the adopted rule and notice supporting them. It recommended that any new restriction be considered through the procedure in the governing documents. My compliance hearing and the policy discussion were placed on the same agenda. The meeting room was full enough that management brought in folding chairs from the storage closet. Marjorie opened with photographs of the blocked walkway, the idling SUV, and a cup left on the parcel locker. She did not use the phrase all morning. She said the board had responded to repeated complaints and that parents had treated the pavilion as a social space. Some of that was true. When it was my turn, I did not begin with the access agreement. I began with Nora. Nora described the mornings when she could not reach her mailbox comfortably. Then she explained what she had actually requested: a continuous path and proper use of parking spaces. She read the sentence management had used to classify her as a supporter of the adult ban, followed by the 2 emails she had sent. Those are not the same request, she said. Next, I showed the 7-day table. The parents were present for an average of 12 minutes in the morning. The afternoon window was shorter. The gray SUV had created a real obstruction. The bicycle and coffee cup were real. Each had a direct remedy. I put the site sketch beside the photographs. The blue box held the waiting group. The white path remained open. The curb stayed clear. Arthur explained where he found the old records. He did not claim the papers settled every question. He confirmed the minutes, the access license, and the site plan were part of the board's own transition archive. Then Denise spoke. She was careful about the limits of her role. The district did not determine whether the HOA had followed its rule procedure. It did not decide my fines. Her job was student transportation. She confirmed that Mateo's release group required an approved adult to be visible. She confirmed that the bus entered Briar Glen under a private road access arrangement. She confirmed that the original site plan included a supervised receiving area. Finally, she described the walkthrough. The ordinary layout narrowed mailbox access. The proposed box and clear path worked when parents followed them. The bus could turn. The driver could see the adults. Nora could reach the mailboxes. The curb had to remain free of parked vehicles. If the HOA removed the supervised area or made the release procedure impossible, the district would reopen the stop review. Denise could not promise that a future stop would remain inside Briar Glen. The room got quiet after that, not because anybody had been threatened. People were doing the calculation. A blanket adult ban solved the crowd by placing the internal bus route in doubt. The smaller plan solved the crowd without giving up the route. The HOA attorney addressed the fines. He said the board had power to regulate common areas. He also said the documents required notice and a recorded vote before a new restriction became enforceable. The available minutes did not show that process had occurred for the adult directive. Marjorie asked whether management's notice was enough. It communicated an instruction, he said. That is not the same question as whether the instruction supports a fine. One board member moved to rescind the 2 fines. Another seconded. Marjorie said withdrawing them would reward residents who ignored board direction. She was not shouting. She sounded frustrated, and I understood why. She had promised several residents that the crowd would be removed. Now the board was considering a plan that kept the parents in place. The treasurer asked me a question. Before you received the first fine, was there any place you could stand that satisfied both the directive and the district release rule? Not one the board identified, I said. He looked at the property manager. She did not have a different answer. The fines were rescinded by a 4-to-1 vote. Then the board considered a 30-day trial plan. The motion restored the waiting box, marked a 4-foot path to the mailboxes, prohibited stopping along the bus curb during the morning and afternoon windows, and limited the waiting area to 15 minutes before and after scheduled service. Chairs, bicycles, and personal items had to remain inside the box. Management would keep a complaint log and bring the results back after 30 days. Marjorie proposed removing the phrase supervised receiving area from the motion. Denise said the district did not care what color the paint was or what the HOA called its housekeeping rules. It did need a location where required adults could be visible to drivers. The phrase stayed. The trial passed 4-to-1. There was no applause. Management moved to the next agenda item, which involved a roof repair bid. That was probably the most realistic part of the evening. A decision that had consumed my family for almost a month became one line in the minutes, and then everyone had to talk about shingles. The district kept the internal stop during the trial. The next week, a vendor repainted the faded blue rectangle and added a white walkway to the mailboxes. Yellow curb markings showed where vehicles could not stop. Management installed a small sign with the morning and afternoon windows. The first few days were awkward. Parents kept correcting each other. One backpack landed outside the box. The gray SUV returned to the curb once, and management photographed the plate instead of everyone standing nearby. That was progress. Nora reached her mailbox without waiting. She still reminded us when the path got narrow. She did not become the honorary grandmother of the bus stop, and nobody needed her to. She wanted her access to work. The complaint log recorded 2 issues in the first week, neither repeated. For the next 3 weeks, there were no blocked path complaints. At the review meeting, management recommended making the trial permanent. Nora asked for one addition. Snow, landscaping equipment, or parcel deliveries could not be stored in the white path. North Carolina did not give us much snow, but delivery boxes had blocked the pavilion before. The board accepted the change. The final vote was unanimous. Marjorie voted for it. That did not erase her earlier vote or make the month disappear. It did show that she cared more about having a workable rule than preserving a losing position forever. I respected that, even if I wished she had reached the same point before the first photograph. Marjorie remained president. She and I did not become friends. When we passed each other, we were polite in the way people are polite after spending a month disagreeing in writing. I came away thinking she had been right about one thing. The pavilion needed rules. Shared spaces usually do. The mistake was treating the largest restriction as the clearest solution. The parents had also been wrong to act as if 12 minutes excused every obstruction. It did not. A short problem is still a problem to the person holding a cane beside it. What changed the outcome was not one dramatic document. The release matrix answered why I needed to be visible. The minutes answered whether the directive had become an enforceable rule. The time log answered how long the crowd was actually there. The access license answered why the blue box existed. and the rainy walkthrough answered whether the smaller plan worked in the real world. 30 days later, the blue paint was still bright. Rainwater collected along the yellow curb. Mateo's bus came around the private loop at 3:11, and I stood where the driver could see me, without blocking Nora's path. Mateo stepped off, adjusted his backpack, and asked whether we were done having meetings about the bus stop. "I think so," I said. He looked at the fresh lines on the pavement. "So, where were parents supposed to stand before?" That was the question the HOA never managed to answer. If you lived in Briar Glen, what would you protect first? Clear mailbox access, adult supervision, or the convenience of keeping the bus inside the community? How would you write the rule so residents did not have to sacrifice one to keep the others? Should a board be allowed to test a directive first and complete the formal process later, or should fines wait until a rule has been voted on and noticed? And if I had never found the access agreement, would the measured waiting box plan still have been enough? I am curious how schools and neighborhoods where you live handle pickup and release. Just leave out the school name, address, and anything that could identify a child.